The evening air over Maplewood, Colorado, was crisp and heavy with the scent of fallen leaves. The sky blazed in streaks of copper and rose as the sun slowly sank behind the jagged Rockies, bathing Cedar Street in a fleeting golden glow. Narrow and lined with small shops, the street held the quiet hush of twilight, the kind that made ordinary life feel almost cinematic. Dust swirled lazily through the air, carrying the sharp scent of pine from the nearby hills. Doors were closing, neon lights flickering out one by one, and the town seemed to lean in toward supper. Amid that calm walked two girls and a dog, each step carrying the rhythm of routine and adventure alike. Laya Hayes, only 8, but already brimming with restless energy, strode ahead with quick, confident steps. Her denim jumper fluttered against her knees, and her brown ponytail bounced freely, strands escaping their tie with every determined movement. Curiosity and boldness radiated from her, the kind of energy that could make her mother sigh and smile, all at once. Beside her, Sophie Hayes, her twin, moved with a more measured grace. Hugging a sketchbook to her chest like it was made of fragile glass, Sophie's gray hoodie swallowed her small frame, sleeves dangling over her hands. Her eyes, slightly darker than Laya's, watched the world with quiet caution. Where one sister saw opportunity, the other measured risk, a balance only twins could maintain. Padding alongside them, Ranger, their loyal 8-year-old German shepherd, carried himself with the weight of experience. His sable and tan coat was flecked with white around the muzzle, and though a faint notch marked his left ear, his posture was sharp and commanding. Once a seasoned partner in rescue missions with their father, Marcus Hayes, Ranger had now settled into a new duty, protector of 2 young girls who considered him more family than hero. His amber eyes scanned the street with careful precision, alert to every shadow, every sound. As the trio passed the last shops, Mr. Walsh, the retired mailman, waved from his porch while watering a stubborn row of geraniums. A cluster of teenagers laughed from the hood of a dented car. A delivery truck rumbled past, leaving a fleeting trail of gasoline in its wake. Everything was ordinary, familiar, the kind of evening that promised nothing out of the norm, until they reached the narrow alley between Jenkins Auto Repair and Daisy's Thrift. Ranger halted instantly. The leash snapped taut in Laya's grip, his body rigid as steel, hackles raised. A low, rumbling growl rolled from his chest, vibrating through the pavement like a warning. "What is it?" Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. Ranger's ears pricked toward the darkness of the alley. A dull groan carried on the wind, followed by the sickening thud of a human body hit. "Did you hear that?" Laya asked, her confident tone faltering. Before the twins could react, Ranger lunged forward, pulling them slightly with him. Laya loosened her grip, trusting the dog completely. His bark split the silence, loud and thunderous, echoing between brick walls. In the weak flicker of a dying light bulb, 3 men emerged, rough and hooded, surrounding a 4th figure crumpled against the wall. The man in uniform, his badge glinting faintly, was battered, bloodied, barely conscious. One broad, bearded attacker spun at the intrusion, eyes flashing. Another, thin and wiry, muttered curses under his breath, while the third, silent and watchful, tugged at their sleeves, urging caution. Ranger planted himself firmly at the alley's mouth, teeth flashing, daring them to approach. "Get out." "Of here, kid," the bearded one growled, stepping back reluctantly. "No," Laya shouted before thinking, her small voice echoing courageously. "Leave him alone." The thin man hesitated, eyes darting nervously to shadows. Sirens wailed, faintly in the distance. Within seconds, the attackers melted into the darkness, boots crunching on gravel, their green pickup roaring to life before disappearing westward. Ranger didn't relax. Chest heaving, he remained a vigilant wall of protection. Sophie clutched, her sister's arm shivering while Laya's gaze fell on the officer slumped on the ground, tall even in pain, sandy hair matted with blood, uniform torn, radio dangling uselessly. "Sir?" Laya asked softly, kneeling, placing her jacket beneath his head. His eyelids fluttered open, revealing faded denim eyes. Voice raspy, he rasped, "Green truck," then coughed, hollow, before sinking back into haze. "Green truck," Sophie repeated firmly, locking it in memory as she fumbled with her phone. "This is Sophie Hayes. Cedar Street, alley between Jenkins Auto and Daisy's Thrift. Officer down. He's bleeding, breathing shallow. 3 men, left in a green truck heading west. Stay on the line." The dispatcher's calm voice instructed. Ranger remained at the alley's mouth, ears swiveling, chest rising and falling like a drum. Neighbors began to peek out, drawn by barking. Mr. Walsh, frozen in slippers, teenagers inching closer. A single snap of Ranger's jaws kept them at bay. Laya pressed a small hand against the officer's wrist. "It's there. Faint, but stubborn," she whispered, voice soft yet resolute. "You're going to be okay." Sirens grew louder, painting bricks in red and blue light as a cruiser skidded to a stop. 2 officers leapt out, one a determined woman with auburn hair, the other tall and steady-eyed, scanning the alley. "You found him?" the man asked, voice calm. Sophie nodded. "It was Ranger," she said simply. "He scared them off." Paramedics arrived. Miguel Ortiz, stocky with salt and pepper beard, knelt beside Daniel Brooks, fitting oxygen while his partner, tall and precise, stabilized the injured officer. Brooks's eyes fluttered open once more. He glanced at the twins, then at Ranger. "Green truck," he whispered weakly. "We'll follow it," the tall officer promised. The gurney rattled toward the ambulance, doors slamming. Sirens rose, carrying Brooks into the night. The twins stood frozen, hands trembling, anchored by Ranger's warm, solid presence. The auburn-haired officer crouched to their level. "You both did good. You stayed, you called, you kept him alive. That matters." Her voice softened. "Let's get you home to your mom." Above them, the last light of day faded, leaving only flickering police lights against brick. Somewhere down the street, a truck engine growled before vanishing into the distance. In his haze of pain, Officer Daniel Brooks had left behind one clue. Green truck. The fluorescent lights of Maplewood Regional Hospital glowed with the kind of sterile brightness that stripped warmth from every corner. The building, a low complex of pale brick, smelled faintly of antiseptic and overbrewed coffee. Behind the double doors, the Hayes twins followed their mother into the waiting area, each clinging to one side of Ranger's collar as if tethered to his steady strength. Maggie Hayes, their mother, moved swiftly, her black work slacks and wrinkled. Blouse evidence of a rushed shift interrupted. In her late 30s, she carried the weight of life with weary grace. Lines around her mouth told the story of determination and sacrifice, raising 2 children alone while her husband served long firefighter rotations. Tonight, fear pulled her features taut. She crouched, checking her daughters with urgent hands. "Are you hurt? Either of you?" "No, Mom," Laya said quickly, shaking her head, ponytail bouncing. Sophie echoed softly, "We're fine." It was Ranger who spoke without words, standing obediently, chest broad, head high, amber eyes sweeping the room with the same vigilance he had shown in the alley. Maggie pressed a trembling hand to his fur. "Good boy," she whispered before, turning back to her girls. The twins tried to explain at once. The alley, the men, the uniform, the blood. Maggie hushed them gently. She had seen her share of hard nights, but nothing in her life prepared her for hearing her daughters describe stumbling across a dying police officer. She gathered them into her arms, and for a moment her resolve faltered, eyes shutting against the rush of relief and dread. A nurse approached, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Hayes?" The officer your children helped bring in. He's in critical care. You can't see him yet, but the doctor in charge will speak with you soon." Maggie nodded, holding her girl's clothes. Ranger shifted at her feet, ears tilting toward the hallway beyond as though he already knew what door led to the officer. Meanwhile, inside the trauma ward, Dr. Ethan Brooks studied the patient on the table. Ethan was in his mid-30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with sandy hair that mirrored his brother's but cut shorter, neater. His green eyes carried both precision and a trace of weariness earned from years of residency and long nights. Unlike Daniel, whose job put him in alleys and crime scenes, Ethan had chosen the hospital. Yet the same stubborn streak ran through both men. The man unforgettable, his brother, lay pale and battered beneath harsh lights. Daniel Brooks, police lieutenant, bore bruises across his chest and a gash above his brow. His breathing was shallow, ribs rising unevenly. Nurses worked around Ethan, monitoring vitals, sliding IV lines into place. "BP still low," one nurse murmured. Ethan frowned, pulling in gloves. "Prep for a scan. That head wound isn't from a fist fight." He leaned closer, inspecting the cut at Daniel's side. The edges were clean, sharp, too precise. He had seen such wounds during his residency when military veterans came in with training accidents. The angle and depth whispered of one kind of weapon, a military combat knife. Ethan's jaw tightened. This was no random beating. Someone had meant for Daniel to bleed out. "Stabilize him," Ethan ordered, his voice cool. Inside, his heart thundered, but he knew panic had no place here. He pressed gauze into the wound, silently promising his brother that this time he would not let him down. Back in the waiting area, time moved in anxious stretches. Maggie tried to distract the twins with vending machine snacks, but the girls' thoughts kept circling back to the alley. Layer played the moment Ranger leapt forward, her small fist clenching in pride and fear. Sophie, quieter, clutched her sketchbook and scribbled shapes that resembled the outline of a truck, its color shaded in green pencil. When the door opened, Maggie stood at once. Ethan entered, mask hanging loose around his neck, fatigue etched into his shoulders. His gaze swept the family and landed briefly on Ranger, recognition flickering. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm Dr. Ethan Brooks," he began, then added softly, "Daniel is my brother." Maggie's eyes widened. "Your family?" "Yes," Ethan said, voice measured. "He's stable for now, but the injuries are serious. We'll keep him under observation. The head trauma is our main concern." "Will he?" Ella's question trailed. "He's strong," Ethan answered, kneeling so his gaze met theirs. His green eyes softened. "And he's lucky you were there, you and Ranger." Ranger thumped his tail once at the sound of his name, though his eyes remained trained on the door behind Ethan, as if unwilling to let his charge out of sight. Ethan studied. The girls, so small yet with a courage that had stopped his brother's bleeding long enough for rescue. He felt a flicker of gratitude and a heavier flicker of anger. If Daniel was targeted, then whoever did this might not be finished. He said nothing. Of his suspicions, not yet. Later that night, after the twins were taken to a side room with coloring books and blankets, Ethan sat alone at his desk, reviewing Daniel's scans. The gash in the side told him what fist never could. He pulled up the file of injuries, then reached for the small notebook he kept in his lab coat pocket, a habit from years of noticing the unusual. He scribbled quickly. "Wound angle, downward blade, 7 to 8 in pattern consistent with KABAR or military rack knife, not random assault." He leaned back, rubbing his temples. His brother had whispered something the paramedic said before slipping under again. Rook Ethan closed his eyes, recalling childhood summers with Daniel when his brother had taught him how to throw a baseball. How to patch a scraped knee, Daniel had always been the protector. Now the roles had reversed. "Whoever you are," Ethan muttered, under his breath, "I'll find you." His phone buzzed with a hospital message. Another patient awaited him. Ethan shoved the notebook back into his pocket, but his mind refused to let go of the pattern. This wasn't just about Daniel. It was about a larger web. One his brother had apparently stumbled into. And Ethan Brooks, though a doctor, carried the same unyielding loyalty as his brother, the cop. He would not let the truth slide into the dark. In the quiet side room, Maggie tucked the twins into thin hospital blankets. Sophie leaned her head on her mother's arm. "Mom?" she whispered. Ranger didn't just protect us. He protected him. I think we should help keep him safe." Laya nodded fiercely. "If those men come back, Ranger will know." Maggie looked at their earnest faces, her heart twisting. She wanted to tell them this wasn't their fight, but the truth was written in the blood on Daniel's uniform, in the way Ranger still sat at the door, ears pricked. Danger had already brushed their lives. She kissed each forehead and whispered, "Then we'll stand together, but we'll be careful." Outside the window, Maplewood streets gleamed under scattered street lamps. Somewhere out there, a green truck rolled, unseen, carrying the weight of violence with it. And inside, in the hushed corridors of the hospital, a doctor with weary green eyes began to piece together a puzzle that could drag them all into shadows. The next morning dawned crisp and pale, Maplewood's rooftop still damp from a late-night drizzle. The Hay home sat at the edge of town, a modest two-story with white shutters and a porch Marcus had promised to repaint for years. Inside, Maggie had barely slept. She sat at the kitchen table, cradling a mug of lukewarm coffee, her dark hair loose for once. Her eyes kept straying to the clock, waiting for the sound she both longed for and feared. Marcus's boots on the porch. It came just after 9, the familiar rumble of an engine, the squeak of brakes, then the thud of a truck door closing. Ranger leapt to his feet from the rug, ears pricked, tail rigid. His bark split the air once, sharp, then softened into a low whine as the front door opened. Marcus Hayes filled the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, his firefighter's jacket slung across one arm. In his late 30s, he carried the kind of strength honed by years of running into flames. Others fled. His face was sunburned, lined from smoke and heat, his dark eyes quick to warm, but quicker still to harden when danger struck. His black hair, flecked lightly with gray, clung damp from the rain. The twins ran before Maggie could stand. "Daddy!" Laya threw herself against him, Sophie close behind, clutching his sleeve as though to prove he was real. Marcus dropped his gear and folded them both into his arms, burying his face in their hair. His laugh was thick, broken by the tightness in his throat. "My girls, you've grown taller since I left. You've been gone forever," Sophie murmured, eyes shining. "Too long," Marcus admitted, kissing their foreheads. His gaze lifted to Maggie, who stood silently, hands clasped at her chest. Their eyes met, the unspoken weight of everything passing between them. He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into the embrace. For one rare moment, the Hayes family was whole again. Ranger pressed forward, muzzle nudging Marcus's hip. Marcus crouched, rubbing the shepherd's thick fur. Good boy. Still watching. "Over them, huh? I heard what you did last night." His voice turned low, solemn. "You saved my girls and a man's life." Ranger huffed, amber steady as if to say, "Always." The reunion should have lasted longer, but ER's body stiffened suddenly, ears tilting toward the door. He barked twice, sharp and questioning, then padded. To the threshold, nose sweeping the frame. Marcus followed, frowning. "What is it?" Maggie asked. Marcus crouched, studying the dirt outside. The rain had left the soil soft, and there in the mud were impressions too large for the children's feet, too heavy for Maggie's shoes. Fresh boot prints angled toward the door, then away again. Heros, slowly, jaw tightening. Someone's been here. The twins froze, eyes darting to each other. Ranger barked again, low and guttural, pacing the porch with hackles raised. Marcus pulled his jacket back on, scanning the street, empty now, save for a passing cyclist. Still, his instincts, those same instincts that had warned him of collapsing, beams and burning houses, hummed with unease. He ushered his family inside, locking the door firmly. "Listen," he said, voice steady, but clipped. "No one goes outside alone. Not until we know more." His arm tightened around Maggie's shoulders, as much to reassure her as himself. The warmth of reunion had given way to the sharp edge of fear. The prints outside their home were not random. Someone had been watching. Across town, Ethan Brooks sat in his small office, tucked behind the hospital's administrative wing. The blinds were drawn, the room lit only by the pale glow of his computer screen and the harsh white of a desk lamp. His tie hung loose around his neck. Dark circles had formed beneath his green eyes. Hef flipped through his brother's chart again, focusing on the wound that didn't belong in an ordinary street assault. He'd written down his suspicion last night, but now he searched for more. Hospital records carried more than injuries. They carried histories, connections, patterns. His fingers danced over the keys, pulling up law enforcement files connected to recent admissions. The system wasn't designed for this, but years in medicine had taught him how to dig. And there, buried in a police incident log cross-referenced with patient treatment notes, a name surfaced: Dylan Crow. Ethan leaned back, the name pulling threads of memory. Dylan Crow, tall, mean-eyed, mid-40s. A known leader of a local crew tied to weapons trafficking. Daniel had arrested him 2 years ago after a sting operation exposed a hidden cache of illegal rifles. Crow had served a short sentence before being released on technicalities. Daniel had mentioned him only once afterward, muttering that Crow was the kind of man who never forgave. Ethan opened another file, a scanned report from 6 months ago. Dylan Crow treated in the ER for a stab wound sustained in a bar fight. The attending physician's notes were odd. Crow refused to name his attacker, left against medical advice, and yet his bill had been quietly signed off by a police officer. Ethan zoomed in on the digital signature, Sergeant Clint Rowe. The name meant little to Ethan, but enough to freeze his blood. A police sergeant covering the expenses of a gang leader. It was more than a favor. It was loyalty. Ethan scribbled in his notebook hand-tight Crow history with Daniel likely orchestrator Rao, possible inside man. He exhaled, slowly pressing his hands to his face. This wasn't just vengeance. It was calculated. Daniel hadn't stumbled into a random alley beating. He had been targeted, and the reach of it extended into the very force sworn to protect him. A knock sounded at his door. Ethan quickly shut the files, sliding his notebook into his coat pocket. A nurse entered, asking about lab results. He answered calmly, his face composed, but inside his mind raced. He knew he had to be careful. If Clint Rowe was protecting Dylan Crow, then speaking openly could endanger not just Daniel, but anyone connected to him, including the Hayes family who had already been drawn into the storm. As the door shut again, Ethan whispered under his breath, "I'll find proof before they come back for him." Back at the Hayes home, evening settled over Maplewood. Marcus stood on the porch again, Ranger pressed close by his side. The twins played quietly inside, Maggie preparing dinner, but Marcus's gaze remained on the street. The fresh boot prints outside. His home weighed heavier on him than the soot of a dozen fires. The reunion was real, and his arms still remembered the warmth of his children. But so too was the shadow that followed them home. Marcus Hayes was a man who ran toward danger for a living. But tonight he knew the flames weren't in distant forests. They were here, this own door. And somewhere in the town's undercurrent, Dylan. Crow's name whispered like smoke, rising toward a reckoning. The rain had come suddenly that night, sweeping across Maplewood in silvery sheets. Cedar Street glistened beneath the dim street lamps, each droplet reflecting the yellow glow like scattered jewels. The Hayes household sat in quiet tension, the storm rattling its windows while within the warmth of the living room, the family tried to settle into a fragile sense of normalcy. Marcus Hayes, broad-shouldered and weathered from years of battling fire, stood near the window, his arms folded. His dark hair was flecked with strands of gray that caught the faint light, and his blue eyes shifted constantly, watchful, uneasy. It had been too long since he had been home, and though the embrace of his daughters had filled him with strength, Rarce's low growls and the memory of footprints outside their door clung to his mind like smoke that refused to dissipate. On the couch, Laya and Sophie sat huddled together beneath a quilt their mother had sewn years ago. Their honey-blonde hair, still damp from evening showers, curled softly at their temples. They were only 8, yet their ease carried shadows older than their age, the mark of children who had seen violence too close. Beside them, Ranger lay stretched on the rug, his sable and tan fur damp from when Marcus had let him out earlier. His ears twitched with every creak, every rattle of wind, and his amber eyes never strayed far from the front door. "Girls," Marcus said softly, keeping his voice calm, though a weight pressed against his chest. "We'll be making some changes around here until I say it's safe. No wandering alone, not even to the corner store." "Understood?" Both girls nodded, Sophie clinging, tore sister's arm. "But Daddy," Laya whispered, "what if the bad men come back?" Ranger suddenly lifted his head, ears rigid, a growl rumbling from deep in his chest, his nose tilted toward the window. Marcus tensed, pulling the curtain back slightly. Through the curtain of rain, headlights cut a sharp glare across the soaked street. A vehicle slowed, its engine rumbling low, heavy, predatory. Marcus narrowed his eyes as the truck crept closer, its color a dull, mottled green that seemed almost black under the night storm. The truck idled near their house, the windshield obscured by the reflection of rain and lamplight. The twins pressed against the glass to peer outside, their small faces pale. "Daddy, what is that?" Sophie murmured. Marcus kept his voice steady. "Stay back." His firefighter instincts honed for years, and chaos surged within him. He memorized the shape of the vehicle, the angle of its grille, the strange sticker on its back bumper. Then, after what felt like hours, but could not have been more than a minute, the truck revved its engine. The sound tore through the storm. Then it pulled away, vanishing into the rain-slick night. Ranger barked sharply at the disappearing taillights, his muscles tense, ready to lunge through the glass if he could. Marcus exhaled slowly, though his jaw clenched tight. "That's it," he muttered under his breath. He went to the front door, tested the lock, and then pulled out a heavy metal chain and a secondary bolt he had bought years ago, but never installed. "If they're circling, they're testing us. Not anymore." The girls watched as their father worked with steady, practiced movements, tools clinking softly against the wood. Maggie, their mother, stepped out from the hallway, her dark hair tied back, in a loose bun, her eyes weary yet fierce. She placed a hand on Marcus's arm. "Do you think they know about the girls being there that night?" Marcus glanced at her, then back at the reinforced door. "They know something. That was no random drive-by." His voice dropped lower. "And I'm not taking chances." While the storm battered the Hay home, another storm brewed across town inside the quiet office of Dr. Ethan Brooks. Ethan sat alone in the small study connected to his apartment. His shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, glasses perched low on his nose. He had always looked different from his brother Daniel. Lighter build, scholarly eyes that seemed to carry both compassion and calculation. But tonight, his features were set with tension. On the desk before him, a laptop glowed faintly, its screen showing encrypted files he had obtained from the hospital's network and beyond. He rubbed his tired eyes, then leaned closer, scrolling through threads of communication that were never meant for him to see. The messages were brief, coded, but clear enough for a careful reader. Crow needs the timetable. The officer won't last if we strike fast. Keep the uniform out of this. Ethan's pulse quickened as the words sharpened into certainty. Dylan Crow wasn't acting alone. He had help inside the Maplewood Police Department. His brother's ambush had not been luck. It had been precision. Information about Daniel's movements had been handed directly to their enemies. His stomach turned as one line blinked in his memory. The green truck will circle back. He slammed his laptop shut and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. To report this to the precinct would mean handing his evidence into the same hands that might already be corrupted. If Clint Rowe, or whoever it was, caught wind of his suspicions, Daniel's life in the hospital and even his own would be in danger. But if he did nothing, his brother's enemies would continue circling, closing in, not only on Daniel, but perhaps even on the innocent family who had saved him, those little girls and their watchful dog. Ethan clenched his fists. He was a man of medicine, trained to heal, not to hunt. Yet tonight he found himself at a crossroads between silence and risk. His dark eyes, so often filled with gentle patience, now carried a glimmer of resolve. He would not stand idle. He would gather proof, solid proof, before stepping into the open. Back on Cedar Street, the storm finally began to thin, the rain softening into a steady drizzle. Marcus checked the last of the windows and locks, then lowered himself onto the couch. Ranger lay at his feet, his head resting heavy on his paws, but his eyes wide open, fixed on the door as though daring it to move. The twins had been sent to bed, though Marcus knew sleep would not come easily for them. He glanced down the hallway toward their room and thought of all the nights he had missed tucking them in, the birthdays celebrated through shaky video calls from distant fire stations. His chest tightened with the knowledge that even here at home, danger prowled close. Maggie sat beside him, her hand slipping into his. "We'll get through this," she whispered. Marcus nodded, though the image of the green truck lingered. He had seen too many homes destroyed by recklessness, too many families torn apart by tragedy. This time, he vowed, his would not be one of them. Ranger gave another low growl, ears twitching toward the window. Marcus rose again, his silhouette framed by the dim glow of the street lamp outside. The drizzle washed the world into muted grays, but somewhere in the distance, faintly an engine revved before fading into silence. The night was far from over. The morning after the stormy night carried with it a heavy stillness, as if the entire town of Maplewood held its breath. On Cedar Street, the Hayes household tried to resume a sense of normalcy, but unease lingered in every corner. Marcus had risen early, tightening the new locks on the doors, while Maggie prepared breakfast with a distracted hand. Laya and Sophie sat at the table with their cereal bowls untouched, watching Ranger, who patrolled near the back door with ears constantly twitching, ready to bark at the faintest noise. It was Sophie who noticed it first. A small rectangle of folded paper lay just inside the threshold of the front door, dampened by the morning dew. She bent down to pick it up, and the moment she unfolded the note, her breath caught. The words, written in jagged black ink, read, "Stay silent or lose more than you can imagine." Her small hands trembled, and she quickly passed it to her sister. Laya's face drained of color. "Daddy?" she whispered, her voice shaky. Marcus came rushing over, taking the note from their hands. His jaw tightened, and the muscles in his neck stiffened as he read. The sight of his children looking at him with wide, fearful eyes struck him like a hammer. He forced himself to swallow his anger. Maggie appeared behind him, wiping her hands on Harapron, and froze when she saw the message. "Marcus, what is that?" Her voice cracked. Marcus folded the paper sharply, stuffing it into his back pocket before the girls could glimpse it again. He put on the calmest face he could manage. "Nothing you need to worry about. Just some prank." But Maggie wasn't convinced. She caught the brief flicker of fear in his eyes, a look she hadn't seen since the day he'd gone into the flames of a burning factory to save a trapped family. Her voice rose slightly. "Don't tell me it's nothing. Our girls were dragged into something they should never have been part of. You can't protect them by pretending it doesn't exist." Marcus clenched his fists, fighting the urge to lash out at the situation rather than at his wife. "I'll handle it," he said in a tone that broke no argument. He turned toward the girls, forcing a reassuring smile. "You two don't need to be afraid. Ranger and I will make sure nothing happens to this house." The twins exchanged nervous glances, their trust in their father strong, but their unease unshaken. Ranger barked once, a sharp, commanding sound that echoed like a promise. He paced the room with tail raised as though he understood every word and was determined to make good on Marcus's vow. Meanwhile, across town, the sterilescent of antiseptic filled the hospital corridor where Ethan Brooks sat hunched in a chair outside his brother's room. His exhaustion was evident. Dark shadows under his hazel eyes, hair rumpled, his white coat wrinkled from long hours. Still, his sharp mind kept replaying the evidence, circling around the name that had begun to surface in whispers: Dylan Crow. Inside the room, Daniel Brooks stirred. For days he had drifted in and out of fevered unconsciousness, but now his eyelids fluttered. Ethan hurried to his side, gently gripping his brother's hand. Daniel's once strong features were pale, marred by bruises, a bandage wrapping his temple. His lips parted with effort. "Dan, it's me. You're safe," Ethan urged softly. Daniel's eyes opened just enough to focus on his brother. His voice rasped, weak but insistent. Dylan Crow. The name sent a chill down Ethan's spine, though he had suspected it all along. Daniel's breath grew shallow again, and he fell back into fragile slumber, the effort having drained him. Ethan sat back, mind racing. Dylan Crow wasn't just a name in a police file. He was the predator circling them all. Ethan stood at the window, staring out into the overcast morning. He understood now why the Hayes family had been targeted. They had seen too much. Dylan wasn't satisfied with merely silencing his brother. He wanted to snuff out every witness, every loose end. Back at Cedar Street, the day dragged slowly. Maggie moved through the motions of chores, but her nerves were stretched taut. Every creak of the house, every rumble of a car passing outside set her on edge. Marcus busied himself with hammer and drill, reinforcing doors and windows until their home resembled a fortress. The girls lingered near the window, watching Ranger patrol, the yard with measured steps. His coat glistened with health despite his age, his dark eyes scanning every shadow. He had been their father's partner once, running into disasters where humans faltered, and now he had devoted himself to protecting two children who needed him desperately. At one point, Sophie whispered, "Do you think the bad men will come here?" Laya placed a protective arm around her twin, though her own voice trembled. "Not while Rear's with us." The dog seemed to hear, lifting his head proudly as if to agree. That evening, when the family gathered for dinner, the mood was subdued. Marcus kept glancing toward the locked front door. Maggie tried to coax the girls into light-hearted chatter, but her attempts faltered under the weight of fear pressing against the walls. Finally, she put down her fork. "Marcus," she said quietly, "this isn't just about us anymore. Whoever wrote that note, they know where we live. The girls aren't safe. We need help." Marcus hesitated, torn between the instinct to shield his family and the knowledge that Maggie was right. "If we go to the police and Dylan has someone on the inside, we'll just be giving ourselves away. So what then?" Maggie's eyes glistened. "Do we wait here for him to make the next move?" Before Marcus could answer, Ranger growled low in his throat, ears pricking toward the window. The family froze, the sound reverberating through the room like a warning bell. Marcus moved quickly to the blinds, peering out into the darkness. Nothing but the rustling of trees in the night breeze. Still, the dog did not relax, his body rigid, ready for action. Marcus returned to the table, his expression grim. "We stay vigilant until I know who's behind this and what they want. No one leaves this house without me." At the hospital, Ethan sat again by his brother's bedside, his mind made up. The faint whisper of Dylan's name echoed in his ears. He couldn't ignore it. Daniel was alive, but barely. Dylan's reach was growing bolder. Ethan whispered to himself, "If I go to the wrong person, it could end Daniel. It could end all of them." He glanced toward the file he had hidden beneath his desk, filled with medical notes and his private scribbles connecting Dylan's associates. Somewhere inside those pages was the proof he needed. But without enough evidence, he couldn't expose the traitor inside the force. The burden pressed heavily on him, yet resolve flickered in his gaze. He would find the truth, even if it meant walking a dangerous path alone. That night, the Hay house grew quiet as the family settled in. The note, folded tight in Marcus's pocket, felt heavier than any weight he had ever carried into a fire. Maggie checked on the girls one last time before bed, finding them asleep with Rangers stretched at their feet like a silent guardian. Outside, the wind swept through Cedar Street, rattling the branches of the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a vehicle revved before fading away. Inside, the Hayes family clung to fragile peace, unaware that the storm around them was only beginning to gather strength. The clouds had not lifted since dawn, their gray bellies hanging low over Maplewood, as if the sky itself was warning of something brewing. The air smelled faintly of wet asphalt and rust, the kind of sharp scent that clung to a town after days of rain. Laya and Sophie Hayes trudged along the narrow sidewalk on their way back from school, their backpacks bouncing against their small shoulders. Sophie had her hair tied in two slightly messy braids, her favorite pink shoelaces splattered with mud. Laya walked beside her, quiet but alert, glancing often at the old German shepherd, patting faithfully at their side. Ranger, though now retired from the rescue unit, still carried himself with the proud gait of a seasoned protector. His coat of sable entangleamed even beneath the muted daylight, and his ears were stiff, twitching at the faintest noise. They turned the corner onto Cedar Lane, a shortcut they usually avoided. "Today, however," Sophie had insisted, "it's faster and I'm hungry." But as they approached the stretch of abandoned lots, Ranger stiffened. His hackles rose like a bristling mane, and a low growl rumbled from his throat. "Ranger," Leia whispered, clutching Sophie's arm. The dog pulled hard on his leash, dragging the twins toward a derelict warehouse that leaned like a tired giant at the edge of the block. Its corrugated metal siding was streaked with rust, windows boarded haphazardly, weeds twisting up from the cracked foundation. The girls followed Rare's insistent pull, their eyes widening as a faint movement flickered in the darkness through a gap in the boards. Inside, voices echoed, rough, muffled, and distinctly threatening. Laya pressed closer to the wall, peering through a splintered slit of wood. Her heart stuttered. She caught the outline of Dylan Crow, tall with a ragged leather jacket, his beard trimmed close, but his eyes sharp like a predator's. Around him were three men, all broad-shouldered and restless. One tapping a knife against his boot, another pacing. Sophie gasped, but Ranger quickly pressed his body against them as if shielding the girls from sight. His growl deepened. "Lila," Sophie whispered, voice trembling. "That's him, the man," Uncle Ethan said. "Hurt Officer Brooks." Laya nodded, tugging Sophie's sleeve. "We have to go." The girls turned and bolted, Ranger racing ahead of them, his paws thudding against wet pavement. They didn't stop until they burst through their own front door, breathless and pale. Marcus Hayes had just returned from the firehouse when his daughter stumbled inside. Marcus was a broad-shouldered man in his late 30s, with dark hair cut short and faint streaks of silver near his temples, a testament to years spent under the stress of emergency calls. His uniform smelled faintly of smoke, and his eyes, though kind, were always tinged with the weight of duty. "What happened?" he asked sharply, crouching before the girls. Maggie Hayes, their mother, emerged from the kitchen, her apron still dusted with flour, worry immediately painting her soft features. "They were there," Sophie stammered. "The bad men at the warehouse." Marcus's jaw tightened. He exchanged a grim glance with Maggie. Ranger barked once, sharp and urgent, then stood by the door as if demanding to be taken back. Within minutes, Marcus, Maggie, and Ranger were retracing the girls' steps. The twins left in the care of a trusted neighbor. Rain began to drizzle again, soaking Marcus's jacket, making the evening darker and more foreboding. When they reached the warehouse, Marcus approached cautiously. The building seemed deserted now, its silence almost mocking. He gestured for Maggie to stay back while he pushed the door, which creaked loudly on rusted hinges. Inside, the air was thick with dust and oil, a cavern of shadows broken only by shafts of dim light seeping through the boards. Then came the sudden sound, boots scraping against concrete. From behind a stack of wooden crates, a figure lunged, a gleam of metal flashing in hand. The man's face was gaunt, eyes bloodshot, and he swung with the precision of someone used to violence. Marcus barely had time to react before Ranger exploded forward. The German Shepherd slammed into the man's side, teeth snapping inches from the weapon. The attacker stumbled, his knife clattering to the ground, and Rare's snarl filled the cavern. Like thunder. Maggie gasped from the doorway, her hand over her mouth. Marcus grabbed the knife, his heart pounding. He pinned the man down with Rare's help, though the sound of footsteps retreating echoed from deeper inside. Dylan Crow and the others were gone. They had never intended to stay. "This was a setup," Marcus muttered through clenched teeth. "They wanted us here." Maggie nodded shakily, her eyes wide. "Then they're watching us, Marcus. They know exactly where we live." Ranger remained tense, his body pressed against Marcus's leg as if to remind him of the danger still lurking. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan Brooks hunched over a stack of medical records in his small office at the hospital. Ethan was younger than his brother Daniel by 5 years, his frame leaner, his hair dark but perpetually unruly from long shifts. His eyes, sharp and analytical, betrayed the sleepless nights he had spent since Daniel's attack. The file in front of him was damning. Dylan Crow's medical history. It detailed treatment after a brutal knife fight years ago. Wounds patched discreetly under a false name. But the signature on the admission form caught Ethan's eye. It belonged to Sergeant Robert Keene, a decorated officer in Maplewood's police department. Ethan's stomach tightened. Keene had vouched for Dylan, ensuring the case never saw the light of day. The connection was undeniable. A dirty cop had been protecting Dylan all along. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of the revelation heavy on his chest. Reporting this immediately to the department would be reckless. If Keene had allies, the evidence would vanish and Daniel's attackers would walk free. Yet holding it back was just as dangerous. Ethan rubbed his tired eyes, then gathered the documents into a folder marked confidential. He would take this to the district attorney himself. It was the only way to bypass the rot inside the department. But even as he locked the file in his desk drawer, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was already watching him. Back at the Hayes household, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, Ranger curled at his feet, his muzzle still damp from the scuffle. Maggie paced restlessly, her hands twisting together. "They're not just after Daniel anymore," Marcus said finally, his voice low but certain. "They're after anyone who stands in their way. That means us." Maggie's eyes filled with fear, but she nodded. "Then we stand together. and we don't let them win. Outside, thunder rumbled across the horizon as though the storm itself was listening. The rain had washed Maplewood clean, leaving the streets gleaming under a pale morning sun. Damp leaves clung to the sidewalks, and the cool air smelled faintly of pine and wet asphalt. In the hospital, Daniel Brooks stood by the window, his arms still bound in white gauze, but his posture upright, almost defiant. Days earlier, he had been drifting between life and death. Now his eyes, steel blue and resolute, reflected both exhaustion and the iron will of a man unwilling to bow to fear. Daniel was tall with dark blonde hair kept short, though strands had grown unruly during his recovery. A scar still marred his jawline from the ambush, but his expression carried no self-pity, only fire. He adjusted the strap of his sling and looked. Back at the group assembled behind him, Marcus Hayes, broad-shouldered and steady as ever. Maggie, whose protective gaze rarely strayed from her daughters, and the girls, Laya and Sophie, clutching Rears's thick sable and tan fur. Ranger sat proudly, ears pricked, amber eyes bright with readiness. Across the room, Ethan Brooks closed a folder and exhaled. The folder was heavy with truth. Medical files, signed reports, and photographs. His lean frame weighed tense, his hazel eyes focused on Daniel. "We don't have the luxury of waiting," he said. "The prosecutor is ready, but we need the arrests. Dylan's crew is meeting at that warehouse again tonight. If we move now, we end this." Marcus's voice rumbled low, his firefighter scalm threaded with steel. "Then we move, but no risks that put these kids in the crossfire." Daniel nodded once, agreed. "We'll handle this by the book. No heroics, only precision." That evening, storm. Clouds gathered again, but this time the thunder felt like a drumbeat of resolve rather than dread. A convoy of unmarked police SUVs rolled down a desolate stretch of road, headlights dimmed. Inside, heavily armed officers checked gear and exchanged tour nods. At the lead sat Daniel, dressed once more in his dark tactical vest, a pistol strapped securely at his side. His injury still HED, but his resolve burned hotter than any pain. Ethan, though not trained for combat, rode along. His place was with the prosecutor's team, ensuring the evidence made it safely to court. Yet he refused to wait idly while his brother walked into danger. Marcus remained behind with Maggie and the girls, though Ranger had been allowed to join the strike team. The German Shepherd rode in the back of Daniel's vehicle, silent but alert, his presence a reassuring weight. "Warehouse up ahead," Daniel murmured into his radio, voice steady. Teams Alpha and Bravo flanked the east and west entrances. "Charlie, cut power. Wait for my signal." The convoy halted, engines stilled. Darkness swallowed the street as the warehouse loomed. Its corrugated metal walls starred with rust, windows shattered like broken teeth. Then came the signal, a soft bark. Ranger, ears perked, had picked up something human inside. Daniel gave a hand. Motion, and the teams fanned out like shadows. The assault began with silence, then chaos. Officers burst through doors, boots pounding, flashlights slicing the dark. Shouts filled the cavernous interior. Men scrambled for weapons, but the police were faster. Gunmetal clattered on concrete as suspects were forced down, cuffed, and dragged away. At the center of the chaos stood Dylan Crow, tall and gaunt, with a narrow face framed by greasy black hair. He wore a leather jacket that had seen too many fights. His eyes glimmered with madness. A predator cornered. He reached for a pistol, but Ranger was faster. With a fierce snarl, the shepherd lunged, teeth clamping down on Dylan's sleeve, yanking his arm off balance. Officers rushed forward, pinning Dylan hard against the ground. "Get him up!" Daniel barked. "Alive! He faces trial!" Dylan spat, struggling. "You think you've won? You don't even know who feeds me information." His laughter echoed harshly through the warehouse. And then the words came like a hammer. "Ask your own sergeant." The room stilled. Officers exchanged confused glances. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" From the shadows at the edge of the warehouse, a figure stepped forward. The man was broad, his uniform dark against the dim light, cap pulled low. Sergeant Clint Rowe, his presence had always commanded respect. A veteran officer with a square jaw, peppered hair, and a voice of authority. He had been Daniel's mentor, the one who had taught rookies how to trust their instincts. But his face tonight was twisted with disdain. "He means me," Rowe admitted, his voice dripping with cold resolve. "You think Maplewood's department is clean? Half of you survive on scraps while I ensured survival with profit. Dylan knew how to pay loyalty." The betrayal slammed into Daniel's chest, harder than any blade. Memories of Rowe guiding him through his first years on the force felt poisoned now. "You sold out your own," Daniel said, voice low, trembling with controlled fury. Rowe sneered. "I did what this town has always done. Look the other way. You should have stayed down, Brooks." He raised his gun, but before he could pull the trigger, Ranger growled, springing forward with terrifying speed. Rowe stumbled, his aim faltering, and an officer tackled him to the ground. Handcuffs snapped around his wrists, his career and his facade shattered in a single instant. The warehouse erupted with finality. The raid was over. Every conspirator was bound. The betrayal had been dragged into the light. Hours later, as dawn stretched pale gold across Maplewood, Daniel stood outside the warehouse. His uniform was smudged with dust, but his posture was unyielding. Ethan approached, clutching the evidence folder, his voice quiet but firm. "The prosecutor has everything now. Dylan, Rowe, their entire network. They'll all face trial." Daniel exhaled, shoulders sagging at last. Relief mingled with grief. "I trusted him." He murmured more to himself than to Ethan. "Rowe was supposed to be one of us." Ethan's hand touched his brother's arm gently. "And now he'll face justice. That's what matters. You gave the town truth, Dan. That's the only way forward." Behind them, Ranger patted over, pressing his wet nose against Daniel's hand. Laya and Sophie, allowed at last to see their father's ally restored, ran to Rares's side, burying their faces in his fur. The children's laughter, innocent, unshaken, was the sound Maplewood needed to hear. For a fleeting moment, amidst all the betrayal and violence, there was hope. The truth had been revealed and Maplewood streets could breathe again. The first light of dawn spilled over Maplewood like a benediction, brushing the courthouse dome with a soft glow. The storm of violence and betrayal that had shadowed the town for weeks now felt distant, though its echoes filled the hearts of those who gathered. The steps of the courthouse were crowded with townspeople, old farmers in their work jackets, young mothers holding restless children, reporters clutching their notepads like weapons, and police officers in their pressed uniforms. Our eyes turned toward the carved wooden doors, waiting for the trial that would mark the end of Dylan Crow's reign of fear. Inside, the courthouse smelled faintly of polished oak and ink, a solemn temple of justice. At the prosecution table sat Ethan Brooks, his sharp gray suit fitting awkwardly on someone more accustomed to scrubs. His dark hair was neatly combed, though fatigue lingered in his hazel eyes. Beside him, his brother Daniel adjusted his reinstated police badge on his Navy uniform. The faint scars along his jaw still whispered of danger, yet his posture was resolute. Today, he was not only a survivor, but a witness for truth. The doors opened. A hush spread. Guards led Dylan Crow into the chamber, his wrists cuffed, his once proud swagger reduced to a hollow shell. He was a tall man with sharp cheekbones and a head of dark hair tied back loosely, his eyes burning with defiance, though his shoulders betrayed the weight of inevitability. Behind him shuffled his men, faces sullen, shoulders slumped, each one chained to the crimes they had chosen. Then came the true shock for the town. Sergeant Clint Rowe, once respected, now disgraced. His blonde hair, once trimmed with soldierly precision, had grown uneven in the weeks since his arrest. His uniform stripped, he looked smaller, diminished, as if treachery itself had eroded him. Some in the gallery gasped, still unable to believe that one of their protectors had turned predator. Judge Mary Ann Cole presided, a stern woman in her late 50s with steel-gray hair pulled into a bun. Her reputation was legendary in Maplewood, fair but unyielding, her gaze sharp enough to cut stone. As she adjusted her glasses and glanced over the docket, the murmurs died in tossilence. The trial began. Testimonies flowed like rivers breaking dams. Daniel spoke with a steady voice about the ambush in the alley and the cruel intent behind Dylan's knife. Ethan presented medical records, scars aligned with a soldier's blade. Prosecutors detailed shipments of weapons smuggled into Maplewood, each tied to Dylan's network. The betrayal of Clint Rose surfaced with each piece of evidence: encrypted calls, leaked patrol schedules, payments hidden beneath false names. The gallery stirred when Maggie Hayes was called. Dressed in a pale blue dress, her auburn hair tied simply at the back, she clasped her daughter's hands as she walked to the stand. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied when she spoke of the fear that had haunted her children. The threats, the strange car, the note left beneath the door. Laya and Sophie, seated in the front row, pressed together, their honey-blonde ponytails gleaming under the lights, their wide eyes solemn yet proud. When Maggie stepped down, Judge Cole looked directly at the girls and said, "You two are braver than many grown men I've seen in this courtroom." The gallery erupted in soft applause, quickly hushed, but the words lingered like a blessing. Finally, the verdicts came. The gavel struck like thunder in the quiet chamber. Dylan Crow, life imprisonment without parole for conspiracy to commit murder and for masterminding the arms trade. His face twisted, but the chains on his wrist reminded him his power had vanished. Clint Rowe, 30 years in federal prison for betrayal of oath and aiding organized crime. The fallen sergeant bowed his head, lips trembling as he refused to meet the eyes of his former comrades. The other men, sentences ranging from 10 to 25 years, depending on their crimes. The weight of justice settled across Maplewood, heavy but cleansing. People embraced, tears and relief mingling in equal measure. Then came a moment few would forget. Sheriff Caldwell stepped forward, holding a small black box. He knelt before Ranger, the German shepherd sitting tall at Marcus Hayes's feet. Ranger's sable and gold coat gleamed under the morning light filtering through the high windows. His somber eyes were alert, calm, steady. The sheriff opened the box and withdrew a silver badge, specially engraved. "Ranger," he said with a voice that cracked with emotion, "for saving lives not once but twice. For standing firm where men faltered, Maplewood honors you." He pinned the miniature badge to the leather harness on Rares's chest. The dog gave a short bark, deep and proud, his tail wagging in deliberate arcs. The entire courtroom rose in a standing ovation. Laya and Sophie threw their arms around Rares's neck, burying their faces in his fur as tears of joy rolled down their cheeks. Ethan, his duty complete, felt the tight coil of weeks finally loosen. He turned to Daniel, who was now officially reinstated, to the police force. Daniel's expression carried both relief and weariness, yet his eyes glimmered with gratitude. "You saved me more than once," Daniel murmured. Ethan shook his head softly. "No, we saved each other." Marcus Hayes stood near the gallery, his firefighter's jacket draped over one arm. His rugged frame seemed softened now, his blue eyes damp as he held Maggie's hand, watching his daughters. Safe, laughing through their tears, he realized no fire he'd fought compared to the terror of nearly losing them. Beside him, Maggie leaned her head gently on his shoulder, her strength finally allowed to rest. Outside, Thiessen climbed higher, spilling gold across the courthouse steps. Reporters called the Hayes family heroes, but the townsfolk whispered another name, the Little Angels. It was Laya and Sophie, after all, whose courage and innocence had shone through the darkest nights. As the crowd dispersed, Ranger stretched out on the courthouse lawn, warm sunlight pooling over his fur. His eyes half closed, he seemed at peace, though his ears twitched at each passing sound. A guardian at rest, yet never off duty. For the Hayes family, he was more than a rescuer. He was their eternal protector. The storm had passed. Justice had spoken. And in Maplewood, dawn felt like a promise kept. At the end of this story, one truth rises above all others. Miracles are not always thunderclaps from heaven. They are often quiet acts of courage, loyalty, and love. Perhaps God sends his angels not with wings, but with the steady paws of a faithful dog, the resilience of children, and the strength of a family who refuses to surrender to fear. In the storms of our own lives, these moments remind us that grace is still at work, unseen yet present, calling us to believe that even in darkness, light can prevail. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Subscribe to the channel to walk with us through more journeys of faith and resilience. And may God's blessing rest upon you and your loved ones as you face each new,